Millionaire's son befriends a poor girl, and his father is shocked by what happens next. Julian Hart surveyed the glittering skyline of downtown Detroit from his office suite atop the Hart Properties Tower. His reflection stared back from the floor-to-ceiling glass. Mid-50s, impeccably tailored suit, sharp eyes that missed nothing, especially not the bottom line. He built this real estate empire from modest beginnings through relentless drive, shrewd acquisitions, and an unwavering focus on profitable development. Now, Hart Properties dominated the city's high-end commercial and residential markets. He lived in Bloomfield Hills, a world away from the urban grit below, and expected his family, specifically his only son, Ethan, to uphold the status and success he had fought so hard to achieve. Ethan, at 17, was everything Julian had engineered him to be. Intelligent, athletic, enrolled at the prestigious Cranbrook Kingswood School, destined for an Ivy League education followed by a corner office at Hart Properties. He had the keys to a luxury SUV, a limitless credit card, and the easy confidence of someone who had never known what. Yet, lately, Julian sensed a restlessness in Ethan, a blasé attitude that bordered on dissatisfaction beneath the privileged veneer. He attributed it to typical teenage ennui, assuming Ethan just needed more focus, perhaps a challenging summer internship within the company. One unseasonably warm Saturday afternoon in late May, Ethan decided to take his expensive Italian road bike for a long ride beyond the manicured lawns of Bloomfield Hills. He was fast, pushing himself, enjoying the speed and the illusion of freedom. Distracted by his music, aiming for distance, he took a wrong turn somewhere in the city, finding himself on unfamiliar streets where the pavement was cracked and uneven. He hit a deep pothole obscured by shadows, the impact jarring. There was a sharp hiss of flat tire, instantly. Worse, the impact seemed to have twisted the delicate derailleur mechanism. He was miles from home, with no patch kit and minimal tools, in a neighborhood vastly different from his own rows of aging houses, some boarded up, interspersed with small businesses bearing faded signs. Frustrated and annoyed, Ethan fumbled uselessly with the tire, acutely aware of his expensive cycling gear and his complete lack of practical skills. A few people glanced at him as they passed, but mostly he was ignored. He felt a prickle of unfamiliar vulnerability. He was contemplating the long, ignominious walk home when a voice startled him. "Looks like you busted your derailleur hanger, too." He looked up. A girl, maybe 15 or 16, stood watching him from the sidewalk. She was small and wiry, dressed in clean but obviously worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her shoes, he noted with an involuntary flicker of disdain, had holes near the toes. But her eyes were sharp, observant, and held no trace of deference. Yeah, flat tire," Ethan mumbled, feeling foolish. She crouched down, squinting at the bike's mechanism. "Yeah, the tire's flat, but this thing," she pointed with a slim, slightly grubby finger, "is bent. Even if you fix the flat, it won't shift right. Might snap if you force it." Ethan stared. He knew vaguely what a derailleur did, but hanger? He wouldn't know where to begin. "Great," he muttered sarcastically. "Guess I'm walking." The girl considered the bike again. "Maybe not. My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, he fixes bikes. Has tons of old parts. Might have a hanger that fits. Or maybe he can straighten this one." She looked him up and down, taking in his expensive bike and clothes. "Cost you, though. Mr. Henderson don't work for free." Ethan immediately reached for his wallet, relieved at the prospect of a solution, however unlikely. "How much?" The girl shrugged. "Dunno. Depends if he has the part." She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Look, I'm headed that way anyway. You can mull it over. Takes about 10 minutes." Feeling he had little choice, Ethan nodded. As they walked, him awkwardly pushing the sleek, damaged bike, the girl introduced herself as Mia. She didn't ask about his school or where he lived, instead pointing out a surprisingly thriving community garden tucked between two abandoned buildings, or the colorful mural painted on the side of a corner store. She spoke with a quiet practicality, a knowledge of her surroundings that was utterly foreign to Ethan's curated suburban existence. Mr. Henderson, a cheerful old man with grease-stained hands, worked out of his cluttered garage. He tut-tutted over the bike, found a compatible used derailleur hanger after some rummaging, came off a decent Schwinn somebody junked, expertly straightened the derailleur itself, and helped Ethan patch the tire tube. The whole operation took less than an hour. "How much do I owe you?" Ethan asked, wallet out again. Mr. Henderson named a price that seemed ridiculously low to Ethan. As he paid, Mia, who had watched the whole process intently, pointed to a battered paperback sticking out of Ethan's cycling jersey pocket, a copy of The Great Gatsby for his English class. "Read that one," she said. "Found it in a free library box last year. Crazy rich people back then, huh?" Ethan was taken aback. He hadn't expected her to know the book, let alone have an opinion on it. Yeah, it's interesting," he stammered. Mia just gave a small, knowing smile. People with too much money sometimes forget what's real. As Ethan rode carefully away, the bike shifting smoothly again, Mia's words echoed in his ears. He felt a strange mix of gratitude, embarrassment, and burgeoning curiosity. He'd encountered a world completely outside his own, met a girl his own age who knew how to fix things, who read classic literature found in discard boxes, and who saw through his privileged exterior with unnerving clarity. The encounter left a crack in his carefully constructed, complacent world. The encounter with Mia lingered in Ethan's thoughts. He found himself increasingly bored by the predictable conversations of his Cranbrook friends, the endless rounds of golf at the club with his father, the structured ease of his life. He felt a pull towards something different, something more real, as Mia had put it. Using the excuse of needing to explore the city for a supposed photography interest, he started driving down to the area near where he'd met Mia, parking his SUV several blocks away and wandering on foot. He didn't seek her out directly at first, feeling awkward about the disparity in their circumstances. He visited the community garden she'd pointed out, observing neighbors working together. He browsed the dusty shelves of the local library branch, a small, underfunded place that felt more alive than the grand library at his school. He saw Mia occasionally reading on a park bench, walking with younger children he guessed were neighbors or siblings she helped watch, haggling good-naturedly with a vendor at a local market. One afternoon, he saw her struggling to carry several heavy bags of groceries. He hesitated, then offered to help. She looked surprised, but accepted with a practical nod. They walked together towards the aging brick apartment building where she lived. "Thanks," she said as they reached the entrance, taking the bags back. "My turn to watch the little ones. Their moms work late shifts." "You do this often?" Ethan asked. "Someone's gotta." Mia shrugged. "We look out for each other here." Over the next few months, these sporadic encounters evolved into a tentative, unlikely friendship. Ethan learned Mia was 15, incredibly bright despite attending an under-resourced public school, and fiercely independent. She devoured books from the library or thrift stores, her knowledge surprisingly broad. She told him stories about her mother, Maria Alvarez, who had worked tirelessly as a cleaner and hotel maid, instilling in Mia a love of reading and a strong sense of dignity before succumbing to pneumonia exacerbated by overwork the previous year. Mia now lived with her overworked aunt, contributing what little she could from odd jobs. Ethan, in turn, found himself sharing things he never discussed with his school friends, his feeling of being trapped by his father's expectations, his uncertainty about the future, his secret love for sketching building designs, something his father dismissed as impractical. Mia listened without judgment, offering blunt but insightful observations. "Sounds like you live in a fancy cage," she remarked once after he described his tightly scheduled life. "Lots of gold bars, but still a cage." Her perspective challenged him. He started noticing the stark contrasts in the city, the gleaming new developments downtown versus the crumbling infrastructure in neighborhoods like Mia's. He saw the resilience Mia spoke of, but also the daily struggles, the lack of opportunities he took for granted. His inherited arrogance began to erode, replaced by a growing empathy and a frustrating sense of injustice. Julian noticed the change. Ethan was quieter, more thoughtful, less interested in flaunting his privilege. He spent less time with his usual crowd and more time exploring or studying at the library. Julian was initially pleased by the apparent maturity, assuming Ethan was finally focusing on his future. The illusion shattered one Saturday when Ethan brought Mia home to the Bloomfield Hills mansion. Mia looked visibly uncomfortable, overwhelmed by the opulent surroundings, but holding her head high, clutching a worn library book. Ethan explained, perhaps a bit defensively, that Mia needed to use a computer with reliable internet for a joint school project on Detroit history they'd somehow concocted. Julian's face tightened. He appraised Mia's worn clothes, her cheap sneakers, her obvious discomfort in his luxurious home. "Ethan," he said, his voice dangerously smooth, laced with disapproval. "A word, please. In my study." Once the door was closed, Julian's control snapped. "What is the meaning of this? Bringing her here? Have you lost your mind? This family has a reputation, certain standards. She doesn't belong here." He didn't use the crude term trash collector from the prompt, but his disdain was palpable. Ethan, usually quick to placate his father, stood his ground. "Her name is Mia, Dad, and she belongs here as much as anyone. She's my friend." "Friend?" Julian scoffed. "What could you possibly have in common with a girl from that part of the city? What could she offer you?" "More than you think," Ethan retorted, surprising himself with his own fervor. "She knows how things really work. She knows what matters. She's smarter and tougher than any of the kids you want me hanging out with at the club." He paused, then added quietly, "And she showed me how much I don't know." Julian was momentarily stunned into silence by his son's unprecedented defiance. He saw a flicker of conviction in Ethan's eyes he hadn't seen before. While still deeply disapproving, he decided, for now, not to press the issue further, assuming this was some form of teenage rebellion, a phase that would pass. He couldn't fathom that this quiet, poorly dressed girl had already begun to fundamentally reshape his son's world and would soon challenge his own. Ethan's friendship with Mia wasn't a passing phase. If anything, his father's disapproval solidified his resolve. He continued to spend time with her, learning more about the challenges and strengths of her neighborhood. Mia never complained, but she spoke with sharp clarity about the leaky roofs, the unreliable heating in winter, the lack of safe places for kids to play after school, the frustration of seeing buildings owned by absentee landlords fall into disrepair while rents crept up. But she also talked about Mrs. Rodriguez's block club meetings, the shared childcare arrangements, the fierce pride people took in their small gardens, the resilience of community bonds. These conversations sparked something in Ethan. His casual interest in sketching buildings began to merge with a growing awareness of social issues. For a major research project in his AP government class on urban policy, Ethan chose to focus on housing insecurity and revitalization models in Detroit, using Mia's neighborhood, anonymously, as a case study. He dove into research, not just on slick downtown developments, but on successful mixed-income housing projects, community land trusts, and models that prioritized resident input and avoided displacement. He discovered, through public property records easily accessible online, that Hart Properties actually owns several neglected apartment buildings and vacant lots in the very area Mia lived, assets acquired years ago in bulk deals and largely forgotten, treated as tax write-offs on the company books. An idea began to form: what if Hart Properties didn't just demolish and build luxury condos, but instead invested in rehabilitating these existing structures, creating decent, affordable housing, and perhaps incorporating community spaces Mia had talked about needing? Full of newfound passion, Ethan spent weeks refining his research, even creating rudimentary architectural sketches and financial projections based on publicly available data about renovation costs, potential grants, and tax incentives for affordable housing. He knew it was a long shot, but he felt compelled to present it to his father. He chose a quiet Sunday evening, cornering Julian in his study. "Dad," he began, trying to sound confident, "I've been working on a proposal, based on some research for school, but I think it has real potential for the company." He laid out his idea: rehabilitating the company's neglected assets near Corktown, creating a pilot project for quality, affordable housing mixed with market-rate units to ensure financial viability, incorporating green spaces and a small community center. He emphasized the potential for positive PR, fulfilling potential corporate social responsibility goals, and tapping into an underserved market. Julian listened with thinly veiled impatience, leafing through Ethan's carefully prepared printouts. "Affordable housing," he finally scoffed, tossing the papers back onto the desk. "Ethan, we're in the business of building wealth, not running charities. Those properties are practically worthless. The land value is minimal. Tearing them down and waiting for the market to turn might eventually make sense, but pouring money into renovation for low-income tenants? The ROI is non-existent. It's naive. But Dad, the numbers could work with the right grants and tax credits," Ethan argued. "And think about the impact." "I am thinking about the impact," Julian interrupted coolly. "The impact on our resources, our brand, our focus. Hart Properties builds premier developments. This is misguided idealism. Stick to your studies, son. Learn how the real world works." Ethan felt a surge of frustration and disappointment. His father hadn't even seriously considered the idea, dismissing it purely on preconceived notions about profitability and status. Yet, the rejection didn't extinguish Ethan's resolve. It fueled it. He realized he couldn't rely on his father's approval. He decided to seek advice elsewhere. He remembered David Chun, a young vice president at Hart Properties known for his innovative thinking and interest in sustainable development. Ethan nervously approached David, outlining his proposal and his father's reaction. David listened thoughtfully. "Your father's perspective is rooted in traditional real estate finance, Ethan," David said carefully, mindful of Julian's authority. "He's not wrong about the challenges. But your core idea, it has merit. There are new financing models, public-private partnerships, impact investment funds looking for exactly these kinds of projects. It requires a different approach, more complex deal structuring." David couldn't openly defy Julian, but he subtly offered guidance. He pointed Ethan towards relevant case studies, suggested experts to consult discreetly, and helped him refine the financial projections to highlight long-term community value alongside potential, albeit modest, returns. He saw the spark in Ethan, the genuine passion, and recognized the potential benefit to the company if such an initiative could be framed correctly. Ethan felt a renewed sense of hope. His project wasn't dead. It would be an uphill battle, requiring more research, more data, and strategic allies, but he was determined to prove his father wrong, not just about the numbers, but about what truly constituted value. His friendship with Mia had opened his eyes. Now, he was ready to try and open his father's. Ethan, with quiet guidance from David Sean, threw himself into refining the proposal for the Corktown Collective, as he'd begun calling the pilot project. He spent hours researching grant opportunities, zoning regulations, and successful community-led revitalization projects in other cities. He knew that to overcome his father's skepticism, he needed an airtight case not just emotionally compelling, but financially sound and logistically feasible. As the proposal gained a bit more substance, David Chen managed to persuade Julian to authorize a preliminary, low-cost feasibility study and internal review of the Hart Properties assets in the target neighborhood. Think of it as assessing potential liabilities. David framed it tactfully, and exploring options for maximizing value, even if that means eventual demolition. We need current data on the condition of those buildings and any associated historical records. Julian grudgingly agreed. It made sense to have updated files on dormant assets. He assigned the task to the company's internal compliance and records department, expecting little more than confirmation of the property's dilapidated state. A few weeks later, Mrs. Peters, the meticulous head of HR and records management, requested a brief meeting with Julian. She looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Hart," she began, placing a thin file folder on his desk. During the review of personnel records associated with the apartment buildings near Corktown, specifically the old Elm Street property, something came up. It relates to a former employee, a cleaner named Maria Alvarez. Julian frowned. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Go on." "MS. Alvarez worked for the contracted cleaning service we used for that building about 12 years ago." Mrs. Peters continued, consulting her notes. "There was an incident. She was terminated for excessive absenteeism." She slid a copy of a termination memo across the desk. "It seems she missed several days during that severe flu outbreak we had back in 2013, I believe. She apparently provided doctor's notes, but policy at the time, during that aggressive cost-cutting phase, was quite strict. The termination was abrupt." Julian stared at the memo. His own signature was at the bottom, crisp and impersonal. He remembered that period vividly: pressure from investors, a drive to trim expenses across the board, a focus on efficiency above all else. He remembered issuing directives about enforcing attendance policies rigidly. He remembered signing dozens of such memos. Maria Alvarez, Mia's mother. The name, the timeline, the circumstances. Mia had described working multiple jobs, getting sick, the sudden loss of stable income. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. His impersonal, bottom-line driven decision 12 years ago, one he hadn't given a second thought to, had likely been a critical blow to Mia's family, contributing directly to the hardship, the overwork, the illness that ultimately took her mother's life. The girl whose insights were now inspiring his son, the girl Ethan defended so passionately, was the daughter of a woman whose difficult life he had, however indirectly, made even harder through callous indifference. A wave of profound guilt washed over Julian, colder and more piercing than any market downer he'd ever faced. His dismissal of Ethan's project as naive idealism, his condescending attitude towards Mia, it all felt suddenly, horribly wrong, tainted by his own forgotten history. He felt ashamed. He knew he couldn't ignore this. He couldn't compartmentalize it as just another unpleasant business decision from the past. It was personal now. It was tied to his son, to the unexpected changes happening within his own family. Later that day, he asked Ethan to bring Mia to the house again, this time not with suspicion, but with a heavy heart. When they arrived, looking slightly apprehensive after the last encounter, Julian met them not in his imposing study, but in the more informal setting of the living room. He asked them to sit, then took a deep breath. "Mia," he began, his voice strained, meeting her gaze directly. "Something has come to my attention regarding your mother, Maria Alvarez." Mia looked startled, wary. Ethan glanced between his father and Mia, confused. "I've learned," I realized, "that she used to work for a service contracted at one of our older properties," Julian continued, the words difficult, "and that Hart Properties terminated her employment about 12 years ago." He didn't try to soften it, didn't make excuses about policies or cost-cutting. It was during a difficult time for her, when she was ill. It was a decision I signed off on, a decision that was wrong. Callous. It lacked compassion. He saw the flicker of understanding, then pain, in Mia's eyes as she made the connection. Ethan looked shocked, staring at his father. "I didn't know," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion he rarely showed. "I didn't make the connection until now. But that doesn't excuse it. My actions, however indirectly, contributed to your family's hardship. And for that, Mia, I am deeply, truly sorry." He wasn't kneeling, as the prompt suggested. The gesture felt too theatrical, perhaps insincere. Instead, he simply sat there, stripped of his usual authority, offering a raw, humbled apology. "I misjudged your mother's situation then, and I misjudged you when you first came here. I was wrong." The room was silent for a long moment. Mia simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. Ethan reached out tentatively, placing a hand on Mia's arm. Finally, Mia spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Hart. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement, a crack opening for the possibility of something new." For Julian, the confession was agonizing, but also strangely liberating. He had confronted a piece of his past, and in doing so, had opened the door, however tentatively, to a different kind of future for himself, his son, and perhaps even for the memory of Maria Alvarez. Julian Hart's apology marked a profound shift within the family and the company. The guilt he felt wasn't paralyzing, it became galvanizing. He threw the full weight of Hart Properties behind the Corktown Collective project, not as a reluctant concession, but as a priority initiative, a chance to rectify past indifference and embrace a new direction. He saw it now not just through Ethan's idealistic eyes, but as a necessary evolution for his company and a personal imperative. He allocated significant seed funding, assigned talented personnel, including David Shun, who was promoted to oversee the new community development division, and used his considerable influence to navigate city bureaucracy and secure necessary permits and partnerships. The project transformed from Ethan's passionate proposal into a tangible, professionally managed undertaking, albeit one still deeply rooted in community needs. Recognizing Mia's crucial role as the project's inspiration and her deep understanding of the community's perspective, Julian wanted to ensure her future wasn't limited by her past circumstances. Instead of immediate adoption, which felt inappropriate given Mia's age and existing family ties, her aunt, Julian focused on practical, empowering support. He established a substantial educational trust in Mia's name, sufficient to cover tuition and living expenses at any university she chose. He encouraged her burgeoning interest in urban planning and architecture, providing resources and connections. As Mia finished high school with flying colors, she was accepted into the University of Michigan's highly regarded Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning. While studying, she took on a formal, paid role within the Corktown Collective project, initially as a part-time community outreach assistant, later as an intern working alongside the architects and planners. Her insights were invaluable, ensuring the designs truly reflected the residents' needs and aspirations, incorporating shared green spaces, a small library/resource center, energy-efficient features, and flexible unit layouts. Ethan, meanwhile, thrived in his role heading the new division. The project gave him the purpose he had craved. He learned the complexities of real estate development firsthand, but applied his knowledge with a newfound sense of social responsibility. He spent countless hours in community meetings, listening to residents, navigating challenges, and building trust. He worked tirelessly alongside David Chun and the project team, proving himself not just as the owner's son, but as a capable, empathetic leader in his own right. The arrogance Julian once worried about had been replaced by a quiet determination and a genuine commitment to the work. Julian watched the transformation in his son with a swelling sense of pride, mingled with humility. He attended community meetings himself, listening more than talking, learning from the residents Mia had introduced them to. He saw the value not just in property appreciation, but in community appreciation. He started directing Hart Properties' philanthropic efforts more strategically, focusing on education and housing initiatives in underserved Detroit neighborhoods. The groundbreaking ceremony for the Corktown Collective was held on a bright, windy Detroit day. Residents, city officials, construction workers, and the Hart Properties team gathered on the site where dilapidated buildings once stood. Mia, now a confident university student, spoke eloquently about the community's hopes for the project. Ethan followed, outlining the project's vision with passion and pragmatism. Julian stood towards the back, observing. He saw Ethan and Mia interacting easily with community members, laughing, listening intently. They stood side by side, representing not just Hart Properties, but a bridge between two worlds, a fusion of resources and lived experience. Later, as the crowd mingled, Julian walked over to his son. "You've done good work here, Ethan," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "More than just building apartments. You're building community. Hope." Ethan smiled, a mature, thoughtful expression that still held a spark of his youthful idealism. "We're doing it together, Dad." And Mia, she showed us the way. He looked over to where Mia was animatedly discussing playground designs with a group of mothers. "She certainly changed things," Julian acknowledged, thinking back to that first, awkward encounter at the mansion. "Changed you. Changed me." He paused. "You chose a better friend than I ever could have imagined for you." Ethan shook his head slightly. "I don't know if I chose her, Dad. Maybe she chose us. Maybe her mom, Maria, somehow pointed her our way." He met his father's gaze. "She didn't just change me or you. She changed the whole family. Showed us what Hart Properties could really stand for." Julian nodded slowly, accepting the truth in his son's words. His empire of glass and steel felt different now, infused with a purpose beyond profit. Looking at Ethan and Mia, he saw not just the future of his company, but the future of a city being built on a foundation far stronger than concrete, a foundation of empathy, opportunity, and the redemptive power of connection across divides. His heart, once guarded by status and fear, felt fuller, prouder, and unexpectedly hopeful.